Someone that's going to be good at raising money during a pandemic, though, and in a remote fashion, it's you. Just as a quick transition to remote. Speaking of the pandemic, just to frame the conversation here, for those that are listening, Alex and I, we were literally planning on traveling with our families to Lake Tahoe. I had rented a house and I had invited you and Tanya and Azul, your daughter, and Nova wasn't around yet, but we had that plan to go there, and then all of a sudden, California is starting to shut down. This thing's happening, and it was like kind of like, do we go? It wasn't quarantine yet, but literally while we're driving to Lake Tahoe and like getting set up, all of a sudden, we're on lockdown in California, and so that was an interesting. I remember because I was on board calls and, my board was freaking out like about this because they were really scared. And I remember talking to your team a little bit about the severity of the situation. And, hindsight is always 2020 when you're in the, the eye of the storm, you kind of think everything's, potentially coming crashing down. And obviously the pandemic is a terrible situation where a lot of people are negatively impacted. But, the reality is that for most tech businesses, there's probably some tailwinds because there's an acceleration. And when you're in the middle of the storm, I thought you were pretty calm about the situation, but, and I remember having conversation with you. First of all, you were much more prepared than the average person because you've been building remote companies for 10 years. And so literally like probably nothing really changed for you. And if anything, maybe a few months of uncertainty where everyone was just like, okay, we're going to, not invest in things and so like most companies probably, you held back your costs a little bit and reduce your marketing spend like most companies did during that time. But when things kind of became clear, you're already so well positioned because I actually called you. I'm like, all right, man, this whole remote thing you've been doing, set me up. Like, and in fact, the microphone I'm talking on was a gift from you. So you're the kind of the remote king in my mind. And so talk a little bit about, fundraising during a pandemic and, the preparation that you had going into this with remote, how it becomes now it's, we'll see where it comes after this, but I'm kind of a convert now after this. So you've turned me out here onto the remote life, but talk a little bit more about, let's talk about that fundraising experience, doing it remotely during a pandemic. And, how did certain aspects of your experience building remote companies put you in a position to be more effective with what you were doing?
So the fact that I've been building remote companies, all of those companies that I mentioned a moment ago, we started remote and they continue being remote. So that allows for a relatively smooth transition into a pandemic. And I say transition because even for those that were working remotely before the pandemic was a transition, right? Like now you couldn't easily go out. Now you couldn't like hang out with your friends. Now you couldn't work out of the co-working space that you wanted to work from. Now you had to find a way of working from home, sometimes a very tight apartment, stuff like that. So it was very difficult for many people, but of course it's easier when all of the systems of the company are already in place for that. Now, as for the fundraising part, I actually don't have a significant amount of experience fundraising in person. I did it during the very first, during the 2 months of last year, but very quickly, as companies starting to announce that they were sending people to work from home, etc., like VCs were some of the first ones also telling people and angel investors like, hey, let's meet in person, right? So out of a sudden, I found myself only having conversations via Zoom with potential investors. And that's when I realized, I have to make sure that not only the presentation looks good and the pitch looks good, but also my setup looks good, because VCs and investors are used to seeing the person face to face. So now I have to create that kind of trust just by the environment. And that's why I ended up like investing in this kind of camera setup and having a nice background also for investors to look at and many other things to increase the chances of developing trust with the person. But even then, during March, late February, March and April, it was dead. No one was investing a single penny in the in any kind of company. However, very quickly towards the end of May and the beginning of June, like markets started to invest heavily, and we were able. So originally, the round that I was expecting to raise a significant capital from a significant number of investors for several strategic reasons. So I wasn't looking for just one check. I was looking for many checks.
Talk about that a little bit. Talk about the rationale there, because I thought this was a really good idea that you had.
So for that, I have to explain a little bit what Torre is. So with Torre, simply put, we are building a new professional network, but one that is not focused on a news feed for you to self-promote yourself. It's more focused, which is what we experienced with LinkedIn today, but one that is actually focused on the job to be done of finding candidates and the job to be done of finding job. There are many reasons why we believe there is a huge opportunity there. Not only it's a highly fragmented market, and there are more than 4,000 job boards, and LinkedIn, as large as it is, has less than 20% of people of working age on Earth. So most people out there don't have a digital professional profile. But also, the process of finding work has been dehumanized for the longest time. So when you submit an application to a job, most people by far never get to know what happened with their application. They don't get feedback. They don't know if they were good enough, or if they were not good enough, why they weren't good enough. So we are trying to bring automation and humanity to the process alongside many other things. But anyway, it's a new network, and it's a bold bet. Our goal is to eventually have all jobs and all talent out there. And as any other two-sided network, we have the chicken and egg dilemma. We need to kickstart network effects in many ways, or as good as fast as we can. And I decided not to pursue a single way of kickstarting network effects. I decided to pursue every alternative out there that seemed viable. And one of them is investors. I figure if instead of having one or two VCs in there investing in Torre, I can have 10, 20, 50 different angel investors. Each one of them is likely going to end up bringing their network, bringing their companies to pilot Torre, etc. So I decided to do that, to almost crowdfund our seed round, and it worked. We ended up with 50 plus investors from 15 plus different continents. I have investors in 4 different continents out there, and all of them are helping us with the growth of Torre. And not only that, like they are engaged on providing input on our product and introducing us to companies, etc., etc., etc. So the timing actually of the pandemic ended up being really good, because I found myself interacting with investors from all over the world without having to go visit them, but simply having a Zoom conversation with them and pitching them Torre. And that's why we're able to reach people as far as the Philippines, Singapore, Saudi Arabia, Greece, and make them investors in Torre.
It's amazing. So they represent almost like nodes in your network. I mean, it's a way to kickstart, these nodes in your network that, allow you to plug into these, these basically, local networks, because your business, you want to build a global business. So you need to kickstart the kind of jobs access, and these people just are really plugged in. So that's I think it's a smart way to do it. And, there's definitely interesting value coming from some investors, but not all investors provide a lot of value. There's a discussion about that I like to think about, which is capital advice and network, is how I kind of think about. And the reality is that most investors, the main thing they provide is money. And that's just natural, because if you have a portfolio of 50 companies, you can't be a service provider for all of them. I mean, it's the reason why Andreessen Horowitz has hundreds of people on staff, is because they are trying to become a service provider on top of a fund. But that's not a very replicable model. And also, most funds in Latin America or globally, they're not, so large where they can afford to hire 300 people on staff that specialize in every single sector of business. So I think it's smart where you're replicating the value add, you're kind of decentralizing the support by having these nodes in a network. And I think that's a great way to kind of kickstart the network effect.
Yeah, and the business model of fundraising Horowitz has not been validated yet. So it's something yet to be seen.
It's true. It's true. I'd say they're doing pretty well. We'll see how all their investments, pan out, but it's a bold move. We'll see. So.